Mr. President.
Senator from Indiana.
Mr. President, I appreciate the remarks of the minority leader here, and I think he essentially gets to the point that all of us who, in this first week for the 113th Congress need to be focused on and need to address. This is our first work week back after the inauguration festivities of yesterday. And it's an appropriate time, I think, for us to discuss the challenges that lay before us, members of this body, over the next 2 years. The most critical, and in my opinion, the most pressing of these challenges is one that we've been dealing with the past 2 years and more, but now become of, I think, even more critical importance, and that is the out-of-control government spending that weakens the health of our economy, it threatens the security of our country, and it jeopardizes opportunities for future generations. When I arrived here 2 years ago, it was clear that the American people were concerned, a growing concern about the out-of-control federal spending. At the beginning of the president's term 4 years ago, that debt limit stood at $10,626 billion plus dollars. In the 4 years of that term, it has risen to over $16,400 billion, more than a $6 trillion increase. It's unprecedented in the history of our country to have such out-of-control spending. It has resulted in our borrowing a very substantial amount of each year's budget, which is not healthy, whether you're a family or whether you're a business or whether you're state government or whether you're the federal government. The chickens come home to roost if we continue to do that. Each American's share of our national debt now is well over $50,000, and that means every new baby born in this country instantly owes the government more than $51,000. We've had 4 straight years of trillion-dollar deficits without a budget in this body. The minority leader just talked about that. Hopefully we will have finally a budget from which to work off of, and a budget for which we can look at what the priorities are and make the tough decisions about how we spend taxpayers' money. We currently spend over $40,000 a second. These are not partisan numbers, and this should not be a partisan issue. These are the facts. As our former governor, Mitch Daniels, said, just do the arithmetic. This isn't necessarily some deep philosophical or ideological issue here. It's a matter of basic math. With financial problems as great as these, it was my hope that when we return now to this 113th Congress, we'll be able to address this fiscal crisis, the same hope I had 2 years ago when I joined the 112th. And as we know, we went through a series of efforts to begin to address this problem. Many of those were on a bipartisan basis. The Gang of Six, which turned into the Super Committee of 12, was a bipartisan effort. Many of us worked with our colleagues across the aisle in trying to put a grand bargain together. Of course, the president had his own commission led by Mr. Bowles and former Senator Simpson. That was rejected. That would have been a good blueprint upon which to begin our discussions. I'll be talking some more about that, and the disappointment, the extreme disappointment of Mr. Bowles and Mr. Simpson in terms of the inability of this body to address what has been predicted as the most predictable financial crisis in our nation's history. Now, we went through this whole process of the fiscal cliff. We unfortunately had to pick the lesser of two evils in order to protect nearly 99% of taxpayers from drastic tax increases, starting with the lowest to the highest taxpayer. The fiscal cliff deal may have allowed the president to fulfill his campaign promise to raise taxes on millionaires and billionaires, but it did little or nothing to address excessive federal spending. So the debate now shifts. The president got his taxes. With revenue off the table, the debate shifts to where it needs to be and should have been in the first place, and that is addressing spending reductions. Just last week, Fitch Ratings warned that America's AAA credit rating is at risk if the Congress and the President increase the debt limit but fail to enact a credible medium-term deficit reduction plan. And we can expect to see more headlines like this if we do not come together and we do not take action to deal with our country's debt obligations. In the coming days and weeks, I'll be speaking in this chamber and outlining what I believe are rational steps that we need to take to get our fiscal house in order. The easy thing to do, and the way Congress has operated over these past 2 years of my service here, is to look at our fiscal situation and say, well, we have more time, or we can deal with this after the next election. And while I thought that was exactly the wrong tactic to take, that's what happened. And there was a series of efforts. Each one ended up so-called kicking the can down the road or postponing the day of decision. This is the day of decision. This is the hour of decision. This is the time when we have to step up now and address our out-of-control spending. We've had that next election. The president has been reelected for 4 years. Members here have been reelected. We have this challenge now in front of us. But continuing with the status quo, governing via crisis, and failing to address our spending problem must be unacceptable. 2013 is the year. 2014, we're back in another election. We all know that the precious 6 to 9 to 12 months that lay before us is the time post-election, with a new president re-election and new members here. This is the time we have to step up and address our debt and deficit problem. If we don't do so now, most experts who look at this, and I'm not an economist, but most economists, whether they're liberal or conservative, whether they are nonpartisan or partisan, whether they are ideological or non-ideological, have virtually all come to the conclusion that unless we address this now in 2013, with an election year in 2014, 2015 will be too late. We have seen what's happening in Europe. We see what's happening in Japan. We see what's happening around the world, a world hungry for America to lead, to address its problem, not through pushing it down the road, not through avoiding tough decisions, but addressing the real issue before us that impacts on the future of this country and the future of generations to come. So now is the time, now is the hour of decision that we have to take to go forward and address this problem. And as I said, I will be using this platform and others as a way to address what I believe we need to go forward with, not only looking at the larger picture, but also looking at how this government spends way beyond its means, spends money that it doesn't have, wastes money through bureaucracy and waste and failed efforts, tries to do more than it should or could or is able. And I want to document some of those. Everything from the macro to the micro, to the absurd, to the bureaucratic, to the necessary tough decisions, particularly in regard to our entitlements, that have to be addressed in order to preserve and save those programs for not only current beneficiaries, but for future beneficiaries. Mr. President, I appreciate the opportunity to begin this process, and I think each of us must dedicate ourselves to the challenge that lies before us, and that challenge is dealing with our out-of-control fiscal situation that, if not controlled, will bring this country down and continue this economic malaise that we're currently in. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.